So we're getting story titles for the first page of stories from the Hacker News API. However, there's a lot more data that we can put on the page. If we take a look at our index component and we look at our stories props that we have, for an individual story, we have a bunch of data like the number of comments that it has, with comments count, the ID, number of points for it, the time as a timestamp as well as a string for when it was published, the URL for it, as well as the user who published it. So we want to include a lot of this information associated with each story along with the title. So back in our index page, we will create a components folder and we'll add a new component called story list, where we're going to iterate over all the stories and include a lot more data than just the title. So we'll grab the div that we're iterating the stories over in, and we'll create a story list component with the same name as the file. We'll paste in the markup and make sure to export it. Export this component at the bottom. Okay, so we're making use of the stories array here in story list, but we're not passing it into our component. So we'll need to import story list from the components folder in our index page. So we'll head down underneath our H1, include our story list component, and we'll give it a prop of stories to which we'll pass our stories array. Then within story list, we can destructure that from props, and now we have our stories. Alright, so now let's add some classes as well as some additional data for each individual story. We'll give the parent div a class name of story list. Instead of having an H2 here, we'll include a div with the class of, let's say, story. I guess I can't use Emmet here. So I'll manually create a div, give it a class name of story. And the first thing within this story div that we'll have, well, first we need to include a key for the div since we're iterating over it. Set that to story ID. Then we'll have an H2, and within that will be a set of A tags. Now the H2 will have a class name of story-title. This will be where our story title will live. We'll have an href that will reference the story's URL. Will take us to the URL if we click on it, and as the text we'll have story.title. Then we'll have a div with the class story-details. Within this we'll first have a span, which will include the count, the points I should say, of each story. So we can get that with story.points. Now sometimes this value is unset or is undefined, so we need to give it a fallback value, a default value, using this OR conditional of 0. So if it doesn't have any points associated with it, if we can't get that data, it'll just be 0. And we'll include the text points after that. Then we'll have a link. So we'll bring in the link component up at the top from next/link. And then within the link we need to make sure to include our set of A tags. Now this link will go to a new page that we haven't created yet. So the href will include some template literals. It'll be to the path /story, and then the query param for it will be ID that will be set to the story's ID. So it'll be taken to an individual story page where we can see all of the comments associated with that story as well as its content. So within the A tags we'll include the number of comments that it has. So story.comments_count will give us that, and we'll also need to give it a fallback value of 0 and the text comments. So that's all of our markup, and if we save all of our files, we take a look in the browser, we can see we have a bunch more data. And now let's take care of our classes and our styling for all of this. So we'll head down, and before the closing tag we'll include some style.jsx, so some style tags will be added, as well as a JSX keyword, include our curly braces and backticks. And the first class we'll write a rule for is story list. We'll give it some padding on the sides, but not on the top and bottom. So 0 padding on the top and bottom, but 1em padding on the sides. For each story, however, we'll flip that and we'll give it 1em of padding on the sides, or I should say 1em of padding on the top and bottom, but none on the sides. For the story title, we'll give it a font size of 1 rem, font weight 400, margin of 0, and then a margin bottom of 0.5 ems. Then within the story title class, we'll select the link. The color of it will be the hex code 333. Text decoration will be set to none to remove the underline. However, when we hover over this link with the hover pseudo class, we will set text decoration to underline or initial, whichever you prefer. Then for the story details class, we'll make the font size a bit smaller at 0.8 rems, and the font weight for both of those numbers will be bold. Within story details, the span, which includes the count, or the points I should say, the margin right will be set to 1em. And then we'll include a rule for the link, where the color will be the hex code 6600FF. Text decoration there will be none. And we'll add a comma to our rule for the hover pseudo class on the story title and include one for the link in story details as well, setting that to underline. So now we'll save, head back to our page. As we can see, our styles look significantly better, and we'll add some additional colors and a better look to this app in general in the following sections.